Men are told a lot of things. We're told to suck it up, be strong, have discipline. Who do you think you are? You can't cry. You're not a man. Men don't cry. We're told all kinds of different things. We are put into a box. We are put into a package. And then we wonder why. We wonder why the statistics for male suicide is extremely high. That's what we wonder why. Today's episode is going to be a real one. This is the episode of my commentary on Sean Strickland on the Theo Von interview. I'm going to be very gentle. I'm also going to be very professional. I'm also going to be very direct and respectful as well. I'm going to give credit where credit is due. So I got a chance to watch that interview, and I analyzed and took a look at the entire conversation between Theo Von and the UFC fighter Sean Strickland. Now, I focused on a great deal of things. I focused on the psychological impact and how his childhood abuse actually molded who he is today, which is awesome. If you're able to take some of what happened to you and alchemize it into power so you can actually move forward in life, then why not? But it does connect to our identity. And that's what we're going to discuss today, because we got the identity, we got behavior, and the way we process our emotions. And you hear me say it on the channel all the time, feel your shit. Yes, feel it and feel it all the way. And a lot of people don't. They push it away. They push their feelings away. Now, I'm not going to analyze this from a form of judgment because I don't think Sean deserves that. I don't think anybody deserves that. I'm going to observe this completely, how it relates to survival and our nervous system growing up through what we look at. And watching that video, I noticed their language, I noticed their body language, their behavior, and the way their emotions move throughout the whole entire conversation. So what really stood out to me was not the content alone, because I'm the type of person to go deeper. I don't play on the surface. I don't play surface games. I go deeper. That's my MO. That's modus operandi right there. I go beneath the content. I look at the human being, how a human being organizes themselves in order to survive certain environments and survive their childhood growing up. I'm looking at where the safety was inconsistent or even completely absent in their life. And I look at it that Sean had to develop self-esteem, and there's still areas of opportunity, but that's up to him to discover. I can notice it, but at the end of the day, it's really up to him and his self-development. Now, what I've noticed was it was all about survival. It was always about survival. It was always about relying on himself, that the only person that he could trust or rely on was actually him. And noticing emotions as well was a big part of it. So what I see in Strickland's narrative, in his story, is the way he dealt with survival, because it actually appeared in his life through his environment and having that constant threat in his life. Because when you're a kid, when you're a child, you cannot reliably depend on your caregivers at that point. So your nervous system is totally overloaded, and you are forced to adapt in the environment that you actually are. And that adaptation takes more than one form. Actually takes one of the two forms. You'll either be extremely self-reliant, hyper-independent, I don't need anyone, I don't need anybody, I only need me. It'll show up that way. It can show up that way. Or falling into those older patterns of victimhood. Now, what you want to understand is that if you are a victim of something, that was to be understood as something temporary. Victimhood was never meant to be a finish line or something that is going to be an ongoing idea throughout your whole life. It is a point in time, and it needs to be understood that it was at that point in time. Because when you heal, you start to move forward, and you're no longer being hooked up into that concept and idea. That is what's really important to know. So in Sean's case, what I observed was he really endured a lot, and he held a lot of stuff in, and he had to keep going forward. He had to endure life and keep going forward. So a psychological structure was literally built not by needing external support from other people, but how he could actually remain safe in his childhood and in his life. So this is not a conscious belief. This is to be understood in terms of survival. When he had to depend on, let's say, his father or somebody else, it wasn't comfortable, it wasn't safe at all for him, that he had to hand over that independence to somebody else. So this made it very emotional for him. And vulnerability was not comfortable. It increased his vulnerability. And what happens is we start to become connected to control. We have to control this and control that and control that, because control connects to survival for him. So your brain starts to move stuff around and look at yourself as the person that you're the only person that you can count on. And that's a form of self-protection, how you protect yourself. It's how you contain who you are at best. So looking at the interview, the body tells a whole lot. It tells a whole lot. There's a lot of indicators somatically, a lot of survival stress that has been there before. So I observed the interview and I paid attention to what his body was doing. Not as some kind of weird interpretation, just how his nervous system starts sending messages out to us. So what becomes really noticeable is when certain memories that he brings up are loaded, absolutely loaded with emotion. And he starts to approach them in ways where he's uncomfortable talking about it. So his posture changes, his body language starts to change. You could see that he has self-protection. That as he's moving his body, you can see that he's trying to close off his body language. And you could see it. You could actually see it. So it goes from neutral to emotionally charged, literally. And a lot of trauma is connected to emotional charge. So if you have a memory and there's no emotional charge behind it, well, that memory doesn't bother you. But if you have a memory and there's an emotional charge behind it and you keep rerunning it all the time, it's going to bother you. However, when you start to express this enough, the more you talk about it, you actually learn to work through it. And this was his chance to do that. I think that's what's important. So you can see shifting in his seat. He was restless. A few times he put his hand on his head, behind his neck. And it was pretty intense. It was pretty intense to watch. And, as a person that really can observe people quite well, I was able to see right through it immediately. Not in a negative way, but I was able to see through to this guy who's had a lot of hard times in his life and maybe had moments of defensiveness with people. But at the same token, underneath was really a guy who's trying to just work through his stuff just like anybody else. So I have compassion for him in that respect. I do. It wasn't a performance. You could see his nervous system. You could see it. I could notice it. His body is not describing the past. I could clearly see he was getting total recall of everything that was going on. And it was an opportunity for him to express in that interview. So now when we go deeper on this, what's my point of view with this whole thing? What am I trying to really get at? Well, when we start to go deeper on it and we go underneath the story that he's trying to tell, you can start to see his psychology come out. We start to look at what he is trying to protect. All right. So when we look at the value of what's going on, what everybody has values, and values can actually dictate your action. And when I look at Sean's values, and based on that interview at first glance, you realize that survival for him was through control in that. And that must have been hard, not easy. Okay. That in order for him to feel totally comfortable and safe, he had to be the person, he was the only person to rely on himself, which does to some degree for some people create hyper independence. I don't need anyone. I don't need no man, no woman, no one to take care of me, right? So it comes out in that way, not realizing that in relationships, we have what's called interdependence. We have codependent, we have independence, and then we have interdependence. So I could see he was trying to hold his emotions back as a form of protection. I could see it completely. But I could also see that because he became an independent person, that was his way of coping with the need to depend on other people, right? And I could see in his story how anticipation was there. Because he didn't really know what was going to happen next, so he had to constantly anticipate. So being vulnerable was actually an issue. It was difficult to be vulnerable. People misunderstand the word vulnerable. They think it's some militaristic weakness vulnerability where a tank has a weakness in it. Emotional vulnerability and militaristic vulnerability have nothing to do with one another. Nothing. And men, mainly men, they confuse that militaristic vulnerability with emotional vulnerability. They confuse it. They feel that if they're emotionally vulnerable, it's considered weak, which is pure bullshit. That's an unadulterated lie because everybody buys into that militaristic concept that if I show my vulnerability, that's considered weakness. They borrowed that concept of if a tank is weak, and that means people could hurt me. And they apply that to their emotions, not realizing it is not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. But he was raised with that value. If I don't rely on anyone, then I'll be okay. There's no risk here. There's no risk of being harmed as long as I don't rely on people. That's what he conveyed. Like, that's what I could clearly understand. Now, when it comes to action on that, that's the value level of things. When we look at action, right, we could see that he was trying to maintain his composure. He really was. He was controlling his emotions through the whole process, and he was doing his best to stay within that place of expression where I'm just going to express what's going on. And during his ability to recall and retell the story, he might have been suppressing some of that vulnerability because it felt difficult. But you know what? My hats go off to him. My hats go off to him because you know what? He took a leap. He didn't have to, but he did. So they weren't necessarily the actions that were holding him back, although they could have been, but he was there. He was there. He was expressing himself. Now, you got to remember, every time you take action, there's also evidence. All right? You have values, you have action, and you have evidence, with that being said. So his nervous system really does a good job of confirming a few things. All right? He is reinforcing certain ideas into who he is. He reinforced the idea that I'm the only person I can rely on. And that somehow increases his survival, which makes him feel like his capacity is going to reach a level above what it was before. So being vulnerable, maybe even vulnerability, it might have previously led to him being harmed. So he was not allowed to be vulnerable. That's where people mess up the whole militaristic vulnerability concept. That when he was dependent on other people, that didn't make him that didn't guarantee him being safe at all. So you could see that even as he expressed everything, even as he was being neutral and telling his story, that a lot of it was filtered through his survival. And he did what he had to do. Now, what this does overall, everything we had, these values and these actions, what they do is they update Sean's schema or mental recipe for life. So that's what happens. He had these experiences, he had these things happen, and now the rules of his life have been updated. And he's starting to realize that as he gets older, not all of these rules can actually stay. That's what he's realizing. So when you get a lot of evidence, your internal rules, they start to change. He might have difficulty recalling everything, because recalling everything might mean being emotional, and that might be hard, but I think he did a decent job. I think this was a start for him. He stayed in the story, but maybe was detached from the actual emotions of it. So he maintained that control because he wanted to regulate himself emotionally. He avoided some of the vulnerability, but I think he stepped into it enough to where we were able to see it, and you know what? My hats go off to him for that. So that's what I'm going to say. This emotional language was there. It was intense for him. So if he felt emotional, he had to put it into words. So he had these little emotional speed bumps in the interview going on, and that's totally okay. But you know what? The identity starts to change because a lot of these rules go right back. They get reinforced into the identity. So this is what Sean Strickland has acquired as his mental recipe. I can handle anything. I can fight anyone. And I can stay composed under pressure as well. I don't fall apart. I keep going. And I don't need anyone. The hyper-independence. Not independence, hyper-independence. And that can impact his own relationships, which is really up to him. At the end of the day, it's not a judgment, but that's an observation that leads to potential impact. That's up to him. That's up to how he handles his relationships. It's hard, okay? But this is what has been reinforced into who he is. Because what he did was he told the story, and there's a difference between processing that story and actually processing and feeling your shit, feeling your emotions. There's a difference. But you know what? This is a start for him. Because guess what? If he did it once, he can do it again, in the famous words of Bruce Lee. So that's what's important. Very important. And it's not about having pity. Okay, there's a difference between pity and actually being present and strong in your masculine frame. There's a big difference between the two. Okay? This is not a projection of weakness, although maybe he was taught that. Oh, if I'm vulnerable, that shows that I'm weak. That militaristic vulnerability we talked about. Your childlike mind interprets that reality, and for Sean, his childlike mind interpreted that reality differently than he does now. And part of his healing is to identify with it today, now. And that's up to him, by the way. That's up to him. How he decides to heal is up to him. He's independent enough, he can figure that out if he decides. But a lot of it could come from the loss of perceived strength, that when you were a kid, I wasn't strong, and that parent mistreated me. And the little boy says, what did I do to deserve all that? That's what the childlike mind says. But today he learns to stick with that emotion and express himself. Now, there is the deeper parts of this here. Self-trust. He's got some pain that maybe he hasn't processed. That's fine. That's up to him. That is up to him. That's not up to anybody else. But aggression was also there. Okay, he had a few patterns that were there where in some cases, aggression can come out as an impulse pattern. Now, it didn't come out necessarily in an interview. That's not what I'm saying. But when the traumas have not been worked through as an adult, when he has conflict with other people, it may come out that way. It may come out into these aggressive impulse patterns. He might, want to escape, and it's up to him to escape in a healthy way, to go work out more, to channel that energy into self-development. The hyper-independence is where it comes out. I don't need anybody. I don't need fucking nobody, and that's how it plays out. And difficulty trusting others or difficulty trusting himself can be a big deal, although there are parts of himself that he's learned to trust with time. Okay, we all know that. So I'm not interpreting this as some kind of moral failure or a mistake. It's not at all like that. It's unprocessed. His feelings have not been felt fully, and it's all about survival and the memory of that survival, and it's really hard. So at the end of the day, the healing does not come from more explanation. Telling your story is the first part about it, but you got to be able to slow down enough to actually feel your shit and understand what you survived, and you're a survivor. So at the end of the day, at the end of this show, in that Sean Strickland interview with Theo Von, I want you to know wholeheartedly that just observing it and understanding it is not just a trauma history. Okay, it's not just about that. It's understanding our nervous system and how we look at survival, and the childlike mind, how it dealt with stuff, how he saw himself as a child and how he saw his parents growing up. That makes all the difference, because that's where his identity was impacted the most. And anybody that tried to control him in some way could be a threat. Could be a threat to his nervous system, not a threat to his aggression or anger, but a threat to his nervous system. Again, my hat goes off to him. I have compassion for him. This is the start. This is the fucking start. This is the start now. And I'm happy in a good, positive way that he was able to express himself on that show, because he is intelligent. You can't be a fighter and not be calculative or not be strategic. It's part of it. But this was his way to get to the next stage of his development. And when he was a kid, this was all about his survival. And you know what? He's got the ability to remain emotionally intact and feel his shit, even though it's hard. So this is the tip of the iceberg. So I want to just say in closing, I give him credit. I give him credit. I really do. But it's so important to understand our values and the actions we take and the evidence that they actually provide. Have a great day. Take care.